Can you see that okay? If someone
It's
can
all good.
Excellent, thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, so you're going to hear from me. I'll just run through the programme. I'm Linda Dunlop from the University of York. Lizzie Rushton from University College London is going to talk about where we've travelled to since the launch of the Manifesto for Education for Environmental Sustainability. And then we'll hear three really interesting contributions linking research and practice. The first from Nazreen Majid from the University of Reading on a climate education and sustainability framework for initial teacher education. Then we'll hear from Rosanna Wilson from the University of Nottingham on the Nottingham Climate Assembly, and then from Sarah Clayton from the University of York on teacher conceptions and misconceptions around concepts for teaching climate change. We're going to hold all questions and discussion for the end, so we should have a good 15-20 minutes for discussion and questions, but please do feel free to post things in the chat as we go. So yeah, and we'll be finishing then at 6 o'clock. So as either an introduction or a reintroduction to the work that many people in this room contributed to as part of the Manifesto for Education for Environmental Sustainability, I'm going to share a very brief video and then hand over to Lizzie to talk about what's been happening since then. Hopefully this plays. Okay, so Lizzie, can I hand over to you, please?
You certainly can. Thank you so much, Linda. So yes, the manifesto, as you can see, was published at the end of 2021 to coincide with the COP26, which was held in Glasgow. And since then, we've been had much activity in the sector in England with the launch of the new strategy for climate change and sustainability, which was also a draft was launched to coincide with COP and then published in April 2022. And so we've undertaken a piece of work to explore how the strategy that's being developed connects with the ideas and insights shared in the manifesto. And I guess I'll just spotlight a couple of things and try and include some positives as well as some areas for perhaps future work. So one of the initiatives in the new strategy is a Climate Leaders Award or a Climate Action Award. And that was something that was very much put forward as an area that young people and teachers would like to see in the manifesto. And they called for their work in this space, for young people's work in this space, to be acknowledged and valued in that way through a no-cost accredited award. So it's good to see that in the strategy. The manifesto also had a recognition about the need for teacher professional development for all teachers to engage in this work. And this is, again, indicated in the strategy, but I think there needs to be much more detail about the resource, both financial and support, that actually teachers will be provided with in relation to that, if that's to genuinely be achieved. And then I guess the last thing to say about the strategy in the time that we have is this strategy really has an economic framing, a depoliticizing effect, as we discussed in the paper on the screen there, and that really isn't consistent with the articulation of education for environmental sustainability that comes through in the manifesto, which has a real focus on ethics and values and ideas of responsibility. So still much work to be done, I think, in this space. And just to give a very brief update into what we've been up to since the manifesto, as well as looking at that strategy, we've been working with teachers in primary and secondary sectors and those in higher education spaces to explore climate change education and to understand what can be needed, what further is needed in practice. So some of the ideas that are coming through there, again illustrated as the manifesto was by Maisie Summer, the fantastic artist and illustrator who's been very much at the heart of this collaboration. Idea of a green thread that needs to run through education. It's not a seasonal event, but integrated. And also ideas of education for environmental sustainability being part of enabling lifelong flourishing. So more on that soon, some resources and illustrations, hopefully by the end of April. So just a very, very quick update, and it's my absolute pleasure now to invite Dr. Nazreen Majid to provide her contribution. Nazreen is Associate Professor at the University of Reading, where she's also School Director for the Climate Education and Sustainable Development Initiative, and she's done some incredible work in this space. So thank you so much, Nazreen, for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm just trying to share my screen. Bear with. I think you can see my presentation screen, can't you? I think it's going wrong. Apologies.
Is it just a black screen? Oh yeah, we can see ourselves.
Yeah, so one more time. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's there, Nazreen.
Perfect. Thank you.
We're on the some context slide.
Sorry about that.
There we go. Perfect. Well
hello everyone. Thank you so much, Lizzie, for that introduction. I'm just going to briefly talk you through the work that we've been developing at the University of Reading in terms of sort of working with trainee teachers and building their sort of confidence and competencies around building climate and sustainability literacies. Just to give you a little bit of background in the context of the piece of work that I'll be presenting, the university has a real history of developing climate science. A lot of our climate scientists contribute to the international IPCC reporting, and we really felt that, you know, there was a real gap in terms of looking at climate education and actually thinking about how we can scale that up and contribute to that space. So we decided to have a climate summit, which actually was a precursor to COP26, which was a real flagship event, obviously, that happened in the UK. So our summit happened in 2021, where we had some key young climate activists who came through, who'd already done the work in the previous year, and they did the mock COP prior to the COP26 happening because of the delay with COVID. As part of the summit, we had some closed meetings, and those closed meetings had key stakeholders like the Department for Education, the Royal Meteorological Society, and a whole range of other colleagues from this space in order to kind of really look at an action plan that was going to be the legacy of the summit. So the summit actually produced a 9-point action plan. The action plan is actually featured in the sustainability strategy that Lizzie discussed a little bit earlier as well. So I'm going to focus in on action point 2. And action point 2 is looking into initial teacher education and building sort of climate literacies with trainee teachers. But in addition to that, really thinking about how we can scale this up and not only work with teachers, but the aspiration is to build that work with teachers as well in the future. So why is better climate education needed? We all know that this is one of the most pressing issues of our time. And young people are demanding this. You may know of the work that's been done with Teach the Future alongside students organising for sustainability. They've been doing track changes and doing an incredible job with the national curriculum and building sort of climate work within the current national curriculum as well. So they are actually doing the work already. There's growing evidence, as we know, of eco-anxiety, and we need to work out ways to build resilience and strategies with young people so that they can look at these ideas in an effective and measurable way in order to make change on a local level and scale it up to a national and international level as well. Teachers actually want to address these ideas. So in a survey that I've done with teachers, they talked about this, but they actually lack the confidence, the tools, the subject knowledge in order to build these ideas within their day-to-day practice as well. So as a result of the work, we actually developed a sustainability climate education framework for teacher trainees, and we're piloting that at the moment. So the key kind of inspiration in terms of the ideas within the framework came from the COP26 UK Higher Education Network of Universities, who presented this paper, Mainstreaming Climate Education within UK higher education institutions as well. So this was kind of the main paper that we drew upon in order to develop key components of the framework. But in addition to that, we also drew upon the Advanced HE documentation on education for sustainable development guidance, which kind of there's sort of real work drawn internationally, especially the UNESCO work that's been done on looking at these key ideas as well. So this is what the framework looks like in terms of the kind of real kind of central components of the framework. So we really wanted to think about the aims and learning outcomes that are going to drive the key ideas within the framework, and we looked at kind of knowledge constructs, what they might look like, and actually how we're going to frame those conversations with our young people in order to develop those competencies as well. So knowledge is an interesting idea from a teacher perspective. We're looking at kind of subject knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, but as Schulman kind of discusses the ideas that we need to have very specific domain knowledge, so subject sort of specific knowledge, and climate education knowledge is very specific. So thinking about sort of the key work that's been done by IPCC reporting, so drawing on that and looking at how that can be broken down. So the United Nations Office for Climate Change have actually done some really good documentations that breaks down that level of work, and we've been using that to work with our trainees as well. But there are other sort of complex ideas within knowledge as well that we want our trainees to kind of really build on as well. So thinking about sort of how our actions and the knowledge around sort of the actions that we take around kind of sustainability drive other aspects as well. And that leads me into kind of attitudes, values, and behaviors. So what does that look like, and how do our values frame this work that we want to be delivering at scale as well? So looking at kind of current frameworks that are being used to develop global citizenship approaches, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, have been used to really critically examine the ideas of kind of how our values and how we live our lives drive this notion of sustainability and looking at sort of the climate emergency within that context as well. And We took sort of the ideas of competencies further by looking at kind of capabilities as well. So looking at kind of our own personal capabilities in terms of what we can do and the aspirations that we have around kind of building these competencies as well. So some of the main kind of ideas are around kind of systems thinking, this notion of connecting everything up and thinking about how how we live and what we consume has a real impact in another part of the world, for example, as well. So there are different kind of approaches in terms of the ways of thinking, the ways of participating, and the ways of being, driving these ideas of sort of competencies and capabilities. And then the next layer of the framework really looked at how we were going to deliver these aims and learning outcomes. And thinking about those, the way we're working on that at the moment is we actually deliver a session and then the trainees kind of go away and try out those ideas on placement as well. So the notion of teacher positionality that drives the aims and learning outcomes is so critical and important in terms of what the way I think about a certain aspect of what's happening in the world actually could potentially frame that conversation. So that notion of kind of objectivity and bringing in debate and discussion with students in schools is so critical and important in driving those ideas as well. But we need to kind of frame our trainees in thinking about their positionality in order that they can effectively work on the 3 aims and learning outcomes with their own students. Climate justice actually intersects in all aspects of life in terms of what we're looking at the moment around decolonial practices. But in addition to that, the statistics are that individuals who have contributed the least to the climate emergency are the most marginalized and the most affected by it as well. So those conversations are critical and they're important in order for us to kind of really think about in order for our trainees to initially think about that, but then how to break that down and work with their students in the future as well. And linking back and going back to sort of this notion of eco-anxiety, we feel that and a really important component, and actually one of the most important components of the framework, is the climate action part of what we can do to equip our trainees to build this notion of climate action. So we've given the skill sets to pupils in school and our trainees in order to do that in school. What can be done at a local level to enact that change in order for young people to kind of know that they're making a contribution to be more sustainable and therefore supporting this fight and making climate action possible as well. So like I said, the Sustainable Development Goals are sort of some of the key aspects that we're working with our trainees in order to build that. But we want them to look at them not in silos, but actually in a connected way. So thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals in a systems approach linked to climate change as well is a good exercise that we've been working with our trainees and getting them to think about those ideas so that they can take that back into the classroom context as well. In terms of on a national picture, as you know, Lizzie talked about this earlier, so I'm not going to sort of go into too much detail here, but we know that there is a strategy now that the government has developed, and they have picked up on some of the key initiatives that drive this framework. So the National Education, the nature parks, that brings quite a few of the components of the framework in there in terms of nature connectedness and the different elements of work that we're working with our trainees at the moment, the Climate Leaders Award and the Sustainability Leadership as well. And they're also talked about in the strategy about the systems thinking. And there is mention of trainee teachers within the framework as well. But we need to kind of critically look at that framework and think about actually is it really going to drive the change that is needed at the moment as well? And Lizzie and Linda's paper really eloquently kind of discusses that in terms of kind of the critical examination of that strategy as well. So as I've said, where we're at the moment, so we are kind of doing a pilot piece of work with all our trainee teachers, our early years, primary, secondary, and further education. We've involved our postgraduate taught MA students in this work as well, and we've got a couple of other higher education institutions supporting this work as well. And we've had a range of opportunities where we've had workshops from students organising sustainability and our local development organisation called Reading International Solidarity Centre to provide workshops on climate justice, etc., in order to support the work and the delivery of the work that we're doing at the moment as well. And that brings me to the end. I'm quite rushed, but hopefully I'm on time. And that brings me to the end of my work.
Thank you so much, Nasreen. We're going to fold all the questions into the final session. So Fab, I'll just burble whilst Rosanna uploads her screen. So thank you so much, Rosanna, for being our next contributor to tell us all about your work with the Nottingham Youth Climate Assembly. And you're on mute, lovely.
Thank you very much. I'm just putting everything so I can see it's in the right place on the screen. So bear with me 1 second and we'll get going. So yeah, I'll begin where Nasreen left off. Thank you so much, Nasreen. This is quite a different project, but really, I think, fantastic to complement all of these different approaches together. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share this project with you. So I'm Rosanna Wilson. I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Nottingham, but this is actually not part of my research, which focuses on wellbeing education in schools. This is a role this is actually a community-led project, which has been supported very much by the University of Nottingham and the Institute of Policy and Engagement. So I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into what Nottingham Youth Climate Assembly is and how it kind of enables young people within Nottingham to link with policymakers and policy making. This is the structure of what I want to talk about really today. So I'll start off with giving you a bit of background and what the Youth Climate Assembly in Nottingham looked like. Talk about some of the positions of the different stakeholders, the young people, policymakers, researchers involved, look at how they've connected with policymakers through the project and key learning for the future as well. So I kind of alluded to a bit of background at the start there. This project is a result of lots of different groups' work, but specifically a group that set up a community initiative set up in 2020 to look at the possibility of making climate assemblies happen in Nottingham. It was a stream of work that led to making connections with a number of organisations in the local community, such as the Piping Club, which is a youth organisation that works in some of the more deprived areas of Nottingham, and also Green Meadows, which is a climate action charity. And as a result of that collaboration, the project was able to gain the opportunity to speak with lots of young people in the city about their understandings of climate change and their opportunities to be able to make change around that. And having collected viewpoints from young people at some of their activities with the Piping Club, we found that 44% felt bad or worried about the future, 42% weren't sure what to feel about the crisis, and only 5% felt hopeful or able to make changes to improve the future. So backed up by lots of what's possibly been said, shared this evening, and by wider research reporting on in the Lancet report on youth climate anxiety. So this project was a pilot citizens assembly in Nottingham. It was to start with young people, given that we saw that they were a crucial missing piece of the puzzle in terms of community engagement in Nottingham. And we young people aged 14 to 25 from across the city were invited to take part. As I've already mentioned, it was funded by the Lottery Climate Action Fund, and also by the University of Nottingham Institute of Policy Engagement, who provided us with funding to work with a writer and artist to produce a manifesto for Nottingham for young people on climate action in linking with Nottingham's 2028 carbon neutrality charter, which was heavily inspired by the BERA manifesto. So we were very grateful for that as a source of inspiration. So the Assembly weekend itself, my slides are going ahead, sorry about that, took place at the University of Nottingham. It was in July 2022 and brought young people from across the city and Greater Nottingham, so that covers a range of different districts, to meet with experts and to follow the format of a mini citizens' assembly, essentially. So during that weekend, young people were to respond to questions around specific issues relating to how they saw the future of climate action in the city, and having dictated through youth panel work building up to the assembly what themes they wanted to look at. And those themes were food and energy, were nature, transport, and shopping and consumption. And you can see there a picture of the fantastic project that they built with the Wildlife Trusts, which was a mini beast megalopolis that's a permanent sort of memento of the event that remains there in the Millennium Gardens. So just a kind of a quick view of the manifesto document there. I want to move though to talk to you about the role of young people and policymakers and researchers in the work. So it was designed to be a pilot citizens' assembly, and one of the first steps within that was to consult with policymakers, and young people actually met with the policymakers in the city council who were interested in this work and wanting to use it to inform their activities. So as I've mentioned several times, the role of young people as decision makers within the process of the assembly was absolutely crucial, because we were aiming to try and not be tokenistic in our envisioning of young people's participation. So early on, we were able to connect with researchers at Nottingham Trent University, Dena Arya, Matt Henn, who I know some people are familiar with their work on youth climate activism, and we saw how important it was to bring a panel of young people together from the outset to be making decisions on this, and for it to be really a community-led initiative and a youth-led initiative. So we had a series of partnering and stakeholder events with young people held between March and April, monthly steering groups, and that group continues to meet. And the assembly content, as I mentioned, was set by young people, as well as then being informed by the adult steering group as well. So you can see here some of the different organisations and local level decision makers we've connected with throughout the project, both in the planning and the after stages of the manifesto creation and the mini climate assembly, the citizens' assembly. So we sought to build a relationship with both city and county, and locally that presents a unique challenge, which I could talk about, but I won't spend too much time on. But it's been really fantastic for the young people to make tracks that perhaps haven't been made in other contexts. And we worked closely with the UON's School of Geography, Masters in Environmental Leadership and Management, and research on the programme was actually done by those Masters students as well. And there they are, although I won't spend too much time talking about more details, but lots of essentially, I've spoken before about it being a bit of a mycelial network of different people and different stakeholders. So young people have connected with policymakers through multiple meetings with Nottingham City Council cabinet members, and they have come back and both responded to the points on the manifesto at the early stages, and are doing a variety of things at the moment, including developing a more youth-friendly version of the Carbon Charter, but also they've invited young people to be part of the Nottingham Green Partnership, which is promoting now a city-wide citizens' assembly at full scale and funded. And that's thanks to the presentations done by the young people in the project to that group. So, like I said, lots of fantastic kind of follow through from the project, and you can see a few more examples there. I think it's important though to also consider kind of what the reflections are in terms of the enduring impact and the integrity of the project and what we learned as a result. So the youth panel continues to exist and expand, and thanks to our partnership with Nottingham Contemporary, which came about due to that support from the ESRC Festival and the university, we're continuing to host events there and make further connections with young people. And from the original set of young people that were involved, we've expanded to reach more than double the original number of young people as a result. And I do want to kind of conclude by saying that we have talked about the need to manifest the manifesto, which involves those asks around food and energy, nature, transport, shopping and consumption. And key ways in which we do this is continuing to build and develop those young people to extend their skills and networks, join with other youth, and develop their skills and knowledge and everything, from public speaking to the science of construction and the food system. And these are things that we're getting involved with, as well as the Nottingham Citizens Youth Listening campaign, which is connecting the relationships between these issues around climate to mental health, cost of living and safety, and campaigning on with candidates for the next local elections. Many of our young people have not experienced the culture of being heard in adult settings and described being shut down by community members when they bring up their concerns about climate and nature. So we hope that the work we're doing will promote a culture shift towards intergenerational dialogue, not just confined to classrooms, but out in the community, in our city's public spaces, at events and in the halls of power. But it is undisputable that we remain an avenue for a small strand of Nottingham youth who felt the confidence and support to come forward and get involved. And arguably we're making up for the lack of scope for these kinds of experiences and encounters within what is accessible via school and community services for most young people. So we hope that this programme will provide a narrative to show the power of community-led initiatives, and watch this space to see how the full-scale Citizens Assembly goes in 2024, for which the Youth Assembly have blazed the trail. Thank you for listening, and I know the questions will remain at the end.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. What a lovely complimentary talk to Nazreen. It's great to see the illustrations in the manifesto, and I really like that idea of manifesting the manifesto. So yeah, I want to hear more about that. Now, to complete our trio of presentations, we're going to hear from Sarah Clayton, who's based at the University of York, and she's going to be sharing her work looking at teacher conceptions around threshold concepts in climate change education. So thank you so much, Sarah. And don't forget to unmute, lovely.
Apologies. Can you see the slides now? Is that okay?
It's all perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Lizzie. So I'm a first-year PhD researcher at the University of York, and I'm also BIRA's 2022 Research Fellow. So I just want to say thank you to BIRA for giving me the opportunity to look at something I've been interested in for a long time. So prior to starting this, I was a science teacher for 9 years, secondary science teacher in state schools, and my research project is trying to address 3 questions. So I'm really interested in what the kind of key concepts or threshold concepts needed for secondary students to understand climate change are, but particularly whether there's consensus around those concepts between expert groups. And the expert groups I'm particularly interested in are climate scientists, secondary science teachers and curriculum experts, and youth climate activists. As Nazreen said, we know that young people feel dissatisfied. We've seen movements like Teach the Future and Teach the Future. But the question is, can we find consensus? And do we have a kind of shared vision of what should be included? And then finally, if I can identify those concepts, what are secondary science teacher conceptions and misconceptions around these threshold concepts? And I should say I'm particularly interested in in-service secondary science teachers, because as someone who went through teaching, I found it was really difficult to source continual professional development. So given that I'm interested in consensus, I thought it'd be interesting to see what the levels of consensus are amongst us as kind of experts from different fields. So I thought we would do an activity called Chatterful, sorry. So I will give you a statement on the screen. You'll have 30 seconds to look at it. And then if you can type your number of agreement using the Likert scale at the bottom, so into the chat, and if possible, a sentence kind of explaining your reason for your response. But don't share them until I say, and then after 30 seconds, I'll count down and everyone can share at the same time. I thought it might be quite interesting for us to see where we're all at. I have to switch between screens, so my presentation might go off as I check. But the first statement is this. So the current Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 curriculum for science is already sufficient to give students the knowledge that they need about climate change. So if you could have 30 seconds to kind of think about that, and put a response in the chat and a reason for why, but don't share until I say. Oh, sorry. Okay. And in 3, 2, 1, if people can share into the chat so we can see. Okay. So some people, actually, there's not that much of a difference. A lot of people around the same. Okay. All right. I'll have another look in a second. Okay, your next statement is this one. Okay, climate change education should focus on private sphere actions and carbon literacy, because these can empower students to form their own opinions about climate change and to take action in a self-determined way. So again, you'll have 30 seconds. If you can think about that statement and pop your answer in the chat, but don't share until I say. Okay, and in 3, 2, 1, if you can share your answers and responses, and we'll again have a look. Okay, so a lot of people saying maybe a shift away from individual actions. Okay. So feel free to have a look in the chat to see what people are saying. It's interesting to see the kind of different levels of consensus amongst us. Okay. And the last comment statement I'd like you to have a look at is this one. So climate change education should provide a basic scientific comprehension of climate change. However, it is not the place of science to address the wider social, economic and ethical debates. So again, if you can have 30 seconds to think about that statement and write your answer in the chat, and if possible, a reason why. Okay, and then 3, 2, 1, if you can share your answers in the chat. And you can have a look. Okay. Thank you. There's some really interesting comments there. That last comment about not separating out and focusing on science in particular, I really agree with. The reason I've decided to focus on science in my studies is because it seems to be where the government currently places a lot of emphasis for educating about climate change. And I guess if students have compulsory education, it's where it will be addressed in kind of the most detail. But agreement in research is really kind of varied in terms of what should constitute climate change education. So on the screen, you should be able to see a table. Now, this table is a synthesis that's come from literature, looking at what could constitute a curriculum or what we could include if we were teaching about climate change. And you can see it goes from it's kind of continuum with scientific facts and kind of those objective facts that you might expect in a science lesson, onto the right to the more kind of socioeconomic aspects of this curriculum. Now, the table was first proposed by Efrat Aylan, and I've changed it by looking at other systematic reviews to look at what's included in other research studies. So I went through the studies included in these other systematic reviews, and I kind of mapped out the concepts that were included. And it became really clear that actually what could be included is much, much bigger. And as Nazreen was talking about, I've changed the table slightly to include systems thinking, which it's become really clear should be kind of embedded across the board. But it's quite an easy thing to say, and it's actually quite hard to know what that might look like in actual lessons. I've also added columns for the ethics, the affective aspects, and also for action. And I think one of the things that's become really clear when we're looking at literature on climate change education is that climate change can mean really different things at local levels. So you can have two teachers educating about climate change, and the lessons and even the schemes of learning can be completely different. And that's something I really experienced when I was doing continual professional development, looking at how to teach climate change in a more effective way in my own lessons as a science teacher. So I think the challenge of mapping this out is knowing what we include and how we prioritise the knowledge that we want to include. Because I think currently the curriculum is kind of more focused on the left-hand side at those scientific facts and the kind of things that you can like order in a schema and you can kind of check learning and progress. It's much harder to implement the kind of effective aspects as well. And I think the other thing I wanted to say is that when we look at this, it's quite hard as well to know as a teacher what should be the priority. If you want to have teach students and you want to change their behaviours, should we be looking at private sphere actions and carbon footprint of individuals, or actually should we be looking at public sphere actions, and is it the place of science to address that? So I'll give you a few moments to have a look at this on the screen, and then as a final kind of activity, I appreciate there's been not that much time to look at this, but I thought I've got a Padlet, and I thought it might be interesting if I post the link in the chat for people to add anything that they think is really missing from this, that, you know, if we were teaching students about climate change before they leave school, compulsory education, what is it we absolutely think they should know? So I will put a QR code on the screen for the Padlet, and I will also post a link in the chat in case people want to go to this Padlet and have a go. Hopefully there is a link in the chat there. And if I stop presenting, there we go. Yeah. So if people want to go to the Padlet, maybe it might be a good idea for me to put it on the board, but I'm aware we're limited for time if I put the table back up. So it might be better for me to leave the Padlet, and I think you can like others' comments and you can see what other people have put on there too. I think it's really interesting looking at the kind of statement in understanding uncertainty, because as a science teacher, that's the only area really I found that when we teach about climate change, it's the only area we really teach about uncertainty. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but something quite thought-provoking about that. Okay, I'll leave the Padlet up and then people can go back and have a look if they want to. yeah, but that's kind of it from me.
That's fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much. And there's a lot of love for your table in the chat. So we want to see that. We want to see that out and usable, quotable, citable as soon as possible. It's a really, really, really fantastic synthesis. So we have some time for questions, and Linda and I between us are happy to try and field those to presenters in chat. If you want to pop anything into the chat, perhaps with a suggestion of who the question might be pitched to. We'd really just give yourselves a second just to pop some questions in there. Okay, so I'll go for the first one because it's there. Rosanna, really interesting. How did you make sure that you had youth panel representative of the community? So it's a question for you there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Aileen. Yeah, I'll press you that my response by saying it was hugely challenging because we just didn't have the sufficient funding to do what a formal full-scale citizens assembly would do, which is to provide a payment to all participants. You add to that obviously the element that you've got young people, so it was entirely voluntary sign up, but we had a huge kind of plan of engagement with schools across the city, with youth and community groups across the city. We target partnered with groups that worked with some of the global majority communities in our neighbourhoods in Nottingham, but it is a completely fair criticism of the project that with it being voluntary, it wasn't possible to do what is a fully representative citizens assembly. So that's why we called it a pilot. It did bring together young people who wanted to be part of that process, and that's something that a message that we're making really strongly to people who want to do the full scale one, is that it really highlighted how the costs entailed in a citizens assembly are there for a reason. So yeah, I hope that answers your question to some degree.
That's great.
There's a follow-up question from Amanda on that, which was about how forthcoming the community groups were and what was the driver there.
So as I've mentioned in the in the original presentation, we worked. We started out with a couple of partnerships that were really instrumental. So Pythian Club work in Baseford, which is in North Nottingham. I don't know, but I might have some Nottingham people in the call, so whether or not that's the case, I'm not sure. But they work across some of the neighbourhoods that experience higher deprivation in the city, and they from the outset, they're a really inspiring organisation, and they worked from the outset to connect with all of the sustainable development goals. They are about being community led, but they are a youth organisation that started out as being led by a former police officer who wanted to tackle knife crime and some of the kind of vulnerabilities that the community was experiencing. So they approached us through a group called the BAME Climate Champions Group, which I believe is Nottingham based, and we made that connection with them. So they were a hugely important partner, and they provided us with connections to other groups. But Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust have a youth arm in the city as well. They were really important, and Green Meadows, which is based in the Meadows, which is another similar neighbourhood in the city. So we were lucky to have some quite switched on groups who were concerned about making these connections, and we were able to make some further links through researchers who were looking into this area as well, at the University of Nottingham again. So those were very forthcoming organisations. It was actually much harder to get schools and colleges to pay attention to what we were doing, and obviously that would have been the best way of actually ensuring we had the broadest range. We did get some fantastic buy-in from certain schools and colleges, but it was a huge amount of work, and so that's, I suppose, a piece of learning, and one of the challenges of doing things from a community-led grassroots level rather than a top-down.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rosanna. So I'm jumping in here, Linda. I just thought we've got some more questions for you, Rosanna, but we'll just move on to a question for Nazreen, if that's okay. So maybe, Rosanna, if you want to respond to any questions in the chat, we can always pick them up. So Nazreen, Lauren's got a question. I wonder if you've seen about how do we get IT providers to use the framework, and how we get teacher educators learning from each other. Is there much going on there? So really great question.
No, that's a great question, Lauren. Thank you. I think one of the key things that we're working on at the moment is we're writing a paper on the sort of initial kind of pre-survey database that we've collected from the trainee teachers, to kind of showcase the conceptualization of the framework as well. So hopefully once that paper is out, it will kind of support colleagues to look at the framework in more detail and actually use different elements of it. But I completely accept and appreciate the real kind of busy nature of ITE programs, thinking about sort of, the real kind of tensions that are in play at the moment with the market review process, etc. So the challenges of time and the challenges of kind of space in order to sit down and really think about these ideas is problematic. So we do want to kind of move things forward with the work that we're developing at the moment and create kind of networks of communities of network in order for us to kind of really showcase and support colleagues in terms of what our experiences have been with the pilot. And then kind of, working with individual institutions in order to kind of, build capacity and develop that work further as well. The framework is published as a University of Reading document. So if anybody on the call is keen to kind of look at it in more detail and would like a copy of it, please do let us know, and I'd be happy to kind of, share that with you, and also happy to have a conversation as well in terms of how best you feel you'd like to work on this and use it in a bespoke way at your institution, because just to kind of finish off on the answering the question, the two institutions that are working with us at the moment in terms of piloting, and there are other colleagues who are using certain elements of the framework as well. So I think that was kind of the aspiration of building this piece of work in the first place, was that we know that everybody's not going to take every single aspect of the work and take it and run with it. There'll be tensions there in terms of time constraints. So, we want people to kind of, take the framework, take the principles of it, but drive it in the way that they would like to, in line with what the commitments are within their own programs as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Nazreen. And I'll maybe got time for one last question that Sarah is kind of addressed to all the speakers, so maybe give you an opportunity to respond to that first if you feel that you would like to. From Paul. Hi, Paul. So one of Rosanna's slides mentioned making up for system in action, but what to extent is our work really showing up system in action, which could be more political? And Sarah, do you and the other speakers feel that that's also necessary? Don't know if you wanted to speak to that, Sarah, first.
Yeah, sorry, I was just having a think about that.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Sorry, no, I think it's really tricky. So I guess I would say yes, personally, but I find it really difficult because so I should give a bit of personal context here, because I, on principle, think that I absolutely do think it should have the political aspects. But my experience, I taught in 4 different schools, and my colleagues who said they cared about climate change didn't want to teach about climate change. And it was deemed too political. I was given a hard time for being a vegan. I wasn't allowed to do plant-based kind of days. In Shropshire, where I've been teaching more recently, there's a big agricultural community. It was really not seen as appropriate. And so I felt really quite ostracized, to be honest, and I found it really difficult. And that's not to be critical of my colleagues who were phenomenal, but it's really tricky, isn't it? And I think teachers find it very difficult to navigate anyway some of those decisions when it's political. But yes, absolutely. And I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion. I think we need system change. Yeah, it's really hard. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
I think that was incredibly eloquent, Sarah. Thank you. Really insightful. Any last words from Rosanna or Nazreen before we kind of wrap up?
I would just say, I think from the work that's been done on our project locally, we just see that this isn't happening without a huge push from people essentially doing the work for free, or a large portion of it, and that seems to indicate that what's needed is huge structural support for this kind of engagement, and it isn't there at the moment. And you've just got a small number of councillors and fantastic individuals who have got roles of power who are desperately trying to do things, and they're just hampered at every level. So yeah, how well are we showing that up? I hope we start to kind of raise the alarm bells a little bit more through our kind of through the roles that we do have. But yeah, it is. We're trying to sing the positive messages as well, and young people need to hear that as well.
And I think just a final point from me, I'm a firm believer in the role of leadership in all of this, really. So I think, you know, going back to the government strategy, there is clear kind of earmarks of sustainability lead, so that needs to be done in a real meaningful way rather than just a patch, really. So leadership is integral to the success of this work from all the layers of education that we're looking at.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So I just want to say another huge thank you to Sarah, Rosanna, Nazreen for such an inspiring hour. I think it's these kind of spaces, I think, well, certainly for me, they give me enthusiasm and inspiration, and to carry on what often is quite challenging work in this space. So thank you so much for your work and for representing a whole community of people that you work with through that. Linda, I can't even remember when our next event is, so I'm going to be really bad at being able to highlight that. Can you do that?
Yeah, I've just posted in the chat to echo your thanks to the people who've presented and the people who've asked questions and thought about these issues. Yeah, our next event for the SIG is the 30th of March at 5 p.m. There's no agenda, so we could pick up the there's no fixed agenda, I mean, so we can pick up some of the questions and conversations that we've started here, and it would be lovely to see you if you can make it on the 30th of March at 5 o'clock. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Bye, everyone.